Hello, book lovers, and welcome to another episode of Authors Love Bookstores from a Mighty Blaze. I'm Joe Moldover, author of the novel Every Moment After, and I'm so happy to be here with you for episode number 104.
Wow.
Since April 2020, I have come to you with my partner, Kimberly Hensel-Lawrence, from independent bookstores across the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom, supporting them and the authors who love them. But today is our first trip to the great state of Alaska. And we are here today at the bookstore in Haines, Alaska, with author Heather Lende and bookseller Amy Kane. Heather and Amy, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe.
For those who don't know, Heather Lende is the current Alaska State Writer Laureate. Her essays and stories have been distributed very widely, from the Anchorage Daily News and Christian Science Monitor to NPR and Country Living. She is a former contributing editor at Women's Day magazine, and for over 20 years wrote some 400 obituaries for the Chilkat Valley News in Haines. She is the author of bestselling memoirs from Algonquin Books, Find the Good, If You Lived Here, I'd Know Your Name, Take Good Care of the Garden and the Dogs, and most recently in 2020, of Bears and Ballots. Her honors include the Alaska Governor's Award for Distinguished Service to the Humanities, the Episcopal Bishop of Alaska's Bishop's Cross Award, the Middlebury College Alumni Award, and very recently, hot off the press, the Alaska Center for the Book 2022 Contributions to Literacy in Alaska Award. So Heather, congratulations on taking all of the literary awards in Alaska.
I didn't even know some of them existed until
yeah, I mean, you haven't left any for any others. And Amy Kane, Amy, you are the owner and bookseller of the bookstore in the town of Haines, and we're delighted to have you here with Heather. Heather, the first question of the show generally goes to the author, and the question is, why have you brought this bookseller here with you today? What is so special about the bookstore?
I brought this bookseller today because I'm so grateful to live in a community with a bookstore, but it's also a really, really good bookstore. And it's unusual in such a small place as Haines. People don't expect it. And Amy's worked really hard to make it even better. Traditionally, there's always been a bookstore at this site, and Amy took over 2 years ago. And it's even better, which I didn't think that was possible. I think the nicest thing about Amy's bookstore, many nice things, include Olive the cat, include being right on Main Street, include her, for me as a grandmother, the incredible children's section. I can surprise all of my grandchildren with books, even when I go out of town, that I get here, and they're all pretty up on it. My daughters are school teachers, early child educators, and I bring them books that they didn't know were there, and then they become real popular in their circles. So that's exciting to me. Also, Amy is very community-minded. She's on the library board, and I'm on the Friends of the Library board, and the store is open on, First Friday events or local special occasions, and I really appreciate that. And I really, really appreciate how much she promotes local authors and Alaskan authors, and sort of puts us all alongside authors from the lower 48 or internationally. Another reason I can tell you, but I could go on and on, but I really love that the collection here is very eclectic, and it mirrors the readers in the community. So for instance, I was hosting a series for Alaska Quarterly Review, and I had to read poetry. And, they're not the kind of poems that might everybody, Yusuf Kamakura, these people that might not be local on the shelves in Haines, Jericho Brown, that kind of thing. And then I'll order them, and then there'll be another copy, and pretty soon the poetry line is getting longer, and people will talk to me about where I got that particular book. I'm like, oh, you can get it at the bookstore. So I love that. I can order any book I need here, and Amy gets it and sort of slips it into the collection. So that's, but I can keep going. I don't want to take up all the time on why the book's so wonderful.
It sounds wonderful. Amy, I want to come to you. I mean, Mighty Blaze was founded in the spring of 2020, to support authors and independent bookstores during COVID. Authors Love Bookstores has run over 100 shows to support independent booksellers. So this is something we're very oriented to. That's our mission. You became you became an independent bookseller in this location. You launched this bookstore on March 6th, 2020. And so, I mean, what is there to say? Tell us about it. Tell us that story.
Well, I think the biggest thing to say is it's a kind of a miracle that I'm still here. I opened on the 6th, and then a week later I had to close my doors because of COVID. And of course, I felt like I had whiplash, and that also I had gambled, and the timing just wasn't going to be right. That this was a big mistake, really. But on the other hand, it was actually really good timing in terms of I had gutted the place and completely remodeled it. And whenever there's construction involved, you could a week this way or that way doesn't make a big difference. But for me, it obviously made a huge difference. If my construction had taken 1 week longer, I would have absolutely nothing. Because I was able to open on a first Friday here in this community, even though I didn't have the packed shelves like I do now, and it was very much a beginning store, people could see that I was there, I was committed. I'd already put in a lot of time in the space. I already had been engaging with the community to see what they wanted from a store. So people just could see that I was very serious about wanting a store here. And during First Friday, this place was packed. There was a line out the door the whole time. People just came out of the woodwork to support, which obviously felt really good. And then after I had to close my doors, the community just did not stop supporting. It was wonderful. It really warmed my heart at a time where it was very difficult for all of us. I would have people calling on the phone or knocking on the window and saying, hey, I saw this book with an orange cover and I really want to buy that. And they didn't need that book, really. But they were doing it to support me, and it felt really, really good, and it paid the bills. And then of course Heather's fans and the release of Heather's book saved the bottom line. Absolutely.
Yes, and that is this book of Bears and Ballots, which was released in 2020. It's a great story. I mean, it's really a heartwarming story, and Heather's written about it. We're going to put a link in the chat for the audience. Heather has written an account of the opening, but it's wonderful. Before we move on with the conversation, I want to remind the audience, people watching now and people who are watching this video in future time, that we are here to support independent book selling. We're going to put a link in the chat so that you can go to the bookstore in Haines virtually and pick up a copy of Heather's book, pick up a copy of Heather's previous books, pick up a copy of other books, but support independent book selling in Alaska with your dollars. Heather, let me come to you. I'd love to talk to you just a little bit about Of Bears and Ballots. I thought, I thought this book was, I mean, this is such a, it's a very interesting book, especially for people like me who don't know Alaska, who don't really know small town Alaska. But it's, it's also it's a very emotionally moving book, and I think it will be emotionally moving at times and in ways that you don't really expect. Certainly the afterword, where you talk about some of the crises that the town has had to deal with, was very affecting. But I think throughout, I mean, it really grabs you with the excitement and the emotional the feelings of a community in action. And I don't know, I think in some ways I felt like it was a love letter to community and to local politics. It's a vote of confidence in community and local politics. So it's wonderful, and I hope people will pick it up and people will read it. This is all by way of saying that it's been a tough couple of weeks for I think for people who really care about community, for people who really in many ways who care about democracy. And I would love to hear a little bit about what you are thinking as we reach July 2022?
It's interesting that you asked that. A couple things that I'm thinking about. I served on the local borough assembly, and I served I was elected along with another candidate, the local newspaper editor, Tom Wolford, and we were the sort of progressive candidates, and we were elected in 2016 and served till 2019. And so, of course, that was a time of the Trump administration, and some of that local politics sort of shifted up or down, up, I guess, here to Haines, and yet because we all know each other and have personal relationships, I think we were able to weather some of that pressure to be in one camp or another on every single issue better. And I see, a lesson from that I see now, and some of the things that I learned on the assembly, dealing with, some pretty emotional issues for me, and especially personal. Tip O'Neill was right, all politics are local, and we've gotten away from that in these media silos. And I think it's really important now to not demonize people who you disagree with, but to try and talk about what you love, why you love it, why it's important, without going to the negative. I think that was one of the things I learned very quickly on the assembly, that you don't stand up and call somebody just a dummy, and you don't call people names. You're never going to change anybody's mind by saying that. And in fact, they're just going to go like this after that. But if you say, gee, I hear what you're saying, but I really feel very strongly that I say love the Chilkat River, not hate your mind, you see? And that's just the way I had to do it, and not hate the minor, you see? And because they're my friends, and I didn't, and I don't, but it becomes that way, and it's very easy to fall into that. And so I think for people who are discouraged right now, the best thing to do, and I know it sounds kind of Pollyanna, but I wrote a book called Find the Good, and I've lived in this small town with many divisions for, almost 40 years. You really have to go from the position of what you love and why. And again, I can even give a very simple example from just this budget cycle in the community. I'm a swimmer in the morning. We have kind of an ancient old public swimming pool indoor that we use here that's failing, and there's always the move to just close it or keep it closed a few months of the year. And we all rallied and got the pool to remain open, not by calling the people who wanted to close the pool mean or dumb or silly, but just by saying how much we liked the pool. And even it took a lot of nerve. At one point, I stood up and I said, we shouldn't be cutting the pool. We should be figuring out how we're going to raise millions of dollars to build a new pool. I could see the people that I knew were just furious about this. Like, what are you going to say to that? Like, they're just like, what is she, crazy? But then it's like, just say it, like, kind of proudly. We need to be kind to each other. We need to respect women's values. We need to not lie and cheat. Who can complain about that? Even in a most recent conversation with somebody, on these horrible gun issues and, these shootings, and just went on the 4th of July. I mean, the one argument that I felt might work better is to say, look, we either have to, do we really believe that our country has more mean, dangerous people than every other country in the world? I don't think so. So maybe we can look at weapons, because unless we want to say that, how can we say this? And so you come at it from a position of, hey, this doesn't make any sense. If we love our country, then we know most people that we run into are good. So why is this happening?
Yeah.
And there has to be another connection, and maybe that might change someone's mind. Anyway, that's just my...
I love what you say. I think what you say about sort of like talking about what you love and talking about what you care about, I just think that's such a great way of putting it. And I think that's just sort of such an elegant way of saying it. So thank you for sharing that. Amy, I'm going to have a question for you about your involvement with the Haines community. First, though, I just do want to say our viewer, Vicky, said she was lucky to visit Haines in 2011. I saw the Hammer Museum and an art museum. So, Vicky, thank you for watching. It brings up a question for me. What's the Hammer Museum?
You know, the Hammer Museum is a museum of hammers, and I know that sounds silly, but it's actually way more interesting than you think it's going to be. And I always encourage people to go. It's actually one of my favorite museums. It's got a very interesting history of when they moved the Hammer Museum. They found this ceremonial hammer when they were digging the foundations. Also, there's variety in hammers that you don't even know about. There are hammers of all different lengths and specific features.
The cocktail hammers, the little one that breaks
there's
ice.
Little cocktail hammers, but there's also, you know, there's acoustic elements to certain hammers. So when it hits the thing the right way, it rings a certain way. And trust me, it's way more interesting than
It sounds great. Well, first of all, we've linked to it in the chat, so viewers should check out the website. My family and I love going to out of the way museums. I'll put in a plug for the Umbrella Cover Museum in Peaks Island, Maine. There's all kinds of great little museums out there about obscure topics. So a hammer museum actually sounds like it's right down our alley. So that sounds amazing. Amy, you are not a Haines native, is that correct? You came to town.
I'm not. I came to town. I officially moved to town a few months before I opened the bookstore, but I'm from a neighboring community. I actually spent 20-some years in Sitka, which is just south of here, still part of Southeast Alaska on an island. And I have friends in Haines and have been coming up here for the last 17 years. I've loved this community from Sitka for a really long time. I've popped up almost every year since. And I've always been trying to figure out a way to make Haines a reality. It's such a small town, and Alaska tends to be very seasonal with employment. So I couldn't really figure out how I was going to get a year-round job here. And when the bookstore looked like it was having some issues, I started inquiring because I just felt like that was a dream job for me, and to be able to make Haines my home was also another dream. So for me, the stars just kind of lined up for this in a really amazing way.
It sounds amazing. And I mean, I think a lot of the people who watch this show have the fantasy of being an independent bookseller, and just, you know, and you have done it. Heather, we have an audience question for you. But actually, I'm going to insert one of my own first, because, you know, just sticking with Haines as a topic. So, reading your writing, reading of Bears and Ballots, looking at the map in the front of the book, which we were talking about earlier, Haines is a fairly small place. And, you know, for somebody like me, I'm coming to you as, you know, from Eastern Massachusetts. So when you say, you know, oh, it's, you know, there's no hospital here, and it's like you've got to hop a boat or a plane basically to sort of get out of town, I just immediately start to get sort of nervous and claustrophobic. And, you know, it's just, but here's the question I want to ask you. You are a memoir writer in Haines. So you are in this community that is not huge, that is not incredibly interconnected, you know, that is, you know, I mean, what I would probably call isolated. I don't know if you feel isolated, but to somebody like me, it seems isolated. And you are sitting there writing about the people around you. You're writing about the people in your community. You're writing about, you know, people who you're going to see on the street every day. Is that uncomfortable? Can that be uncomfortable to be publishing memoirs in that type of a environment?
It evolved. So it's not like I sat down and said, you know, and sort of in secret, I'm going to write a book about life in Haines and all the people that I interact with and the things that I do and my family does and what happens in the community when I go to the doctor or when I go to the airport or when I'm at a basketball game or on a hike. What happened was I began writing small little slice of life commentaries for the local radio station here, you know, in the 1980s, and they went statewide, and then those stories went to NPR, and then a publisher asked if I wanted to write a book, and concurrently the Anchorage Daily News had me writing a column about life in Haines. So people knew I was writing about Haines, and they were sort of personal essay column-y type of things, and that was my beat. And then doing the obituaries, then I was asking questions about people and publishing the answers in the newspaper. And obviously, when you do that kind of work, there's plenty of things that people say, you know, this is not for publication, and you don't say. And so I think I earned some trust through that work. And then through the column work, being guided by good editors about, what was the right lane to kind of be in with this, and how do you balance the privacy and the personal and the great stories. And so it evolved. I don't think I would have started and said, hey, I'm going to write a book about this town, when I got here, about life in this town. But the columns and the commentaries became the stories. And the other thing, I do think people often will, they'll read my books, and they know there's, especially like in Bears and Ballots in the local politics, that there's a lot more I could have said and I didn't. I'm pretty generous. I'm not the kind that's, I'm writing about hard things, obviously, and tough things that happen, but things that are public, really, in our community, and things that are okay to talk about, the things that have been in the newspaper, on the radio, but coming at it from more of my personal perspective. And so, so far anyway, I hope that works. It's the older I get, the more I marvel that I did that. And that I can't honestly tell you there's some secret to it or whatever. I do know that having the bookstore in Haines has made my work much more popular, and it's because not what everybody thinks, that visitors come here, like our one of the listeners tonight, but that because the town is made up of many people that have come and gone from different areas or who have family around the country, people always buy my books and they send them to relatives for Christmas or Easter, Thanksgiving, birthdays, whatever, different events, and even book clubs in different states. They have a sister that's in South Carolina, and that spreads mine all over, and other bookstores will get them. And so, I feel like I owe the community for being generous with me. I'm generous with them, and it's very much, it's very symbiotic, all these relationships in a small town. And it's not that much different than our family owns a lumberyard. My husband runs a lumberyard, and, we provide wood to build people's houses, and you have to, be mindful and make good deals, and sometimes lend people more than you might want. It's all part of living together in a small place, which ironically makes it feel less isolated when we share our stories, and we're all dependent on each other one way or the other. The other thing that happened to me way back in the beginning, in If You Lived Here, there's a story in that was a newspaper column and an NPR piece about the sinking of a boat, where some of our closest friends lost one of their sons, but two other sons were rescued by the Coast Guard, and they're the godparents of our children. I wrote about that right away when it happened, and I was also very involved in it, obviously, being very close. And maybe a month later or so, we were all at dinner with some friends and neighbors, and one of the neighbors said, Heather, to the mom of this, aren't you mad that Heather just wrote about this like right away? And she's an artist herself, and she said, well, anybody knows if you're at Heather's dinner table, then you're probably going to be in her stories, and if you don't want to be in her stories, then don't be her friend. And she said, this is her art, and I do mine, and she does hers, and her art is telling stories about us.
Yeah.
And so I felt in some ways maybe that gave me permission. I had another mom who lost a son in a snow machine accident after the train, and I wrote a story about that. And she thanked me, because she said that somebody might not ever remember that, and now he's remembered. And then even more, a funny one was an old timer died who was very eccentric. And when I was doing his obituary, his wife said, too bad he didn't die sooner, then he would have been in that first book. And I don't think she really, but anyway, so there's that. But I don't know. I can't say that I'm not one of those people that say, write everything you want and, damn the torpedoes. I'm cautious to some extent.
Let me, I love the way you describe it is very generous. Follow-up question, and this is the one from the audience that I jumped in front of, but they would like to hear you say something about being an obituary writer. I know it's something that you've spoken about, written about before. We have a link to a PRI interview that you did that we're going to put in the chat. But yeah, I wonder if you would just say a few words about about obituary writing and sort of, I get maybe in particular about how obituary writing may have sort of prepared you to do some of this other, other writing that you've done.
Oh, I think you can't, as anybody knows who's even had someone, close to them die, it changes your life, and often that time is, it's really intense and sad, and you vow to do all these things different and to live life to the fullest and all these things, and then life keeps going. But when you're like I was writing obituaries for the newspaper for a lot of years, it might happen, twice a month, you know, a lot, 70 times a year maybe, or some years 15 times a year, but way more often, and with people I knew or people that they were close to that I knew. It gave me more empathy. It made me realize, how kind of lucky I was or we are, and that any one of us could have this happen at any time, whether it's an accident or cancer, or heart attack, whatever. Stuff happens, and none of us are immune. I mean, and if I go through the world believing, that good things can happen to anybody, well, why shouldn't bad things either? And so that just changed my view of things. And then I felt like, gosh, all these people that I'm with, they're so, it seems like they're just extraordinary, even though they're ordinary, and they're not the kind of stories that are told, and even less and less are told as media becomes more homogenized. We all know about the Kardashians, but not very many people know about the Nashes or whatever, and the real people that live here and live in a small place and raise a family and work hard or do the things we do. So I don't know, that's a kind of a long answer to it, but it completely changed the way I saw the world and the way I saw people, and also helped me to be way less judgmental than is normal, because you just, you're walking out of all kinds of homes, all kinds of situations with all kinds of people. And my job was basically to, try to make it better for a little bit and be kind and not add to the pain,
Yeah.
And that obviously carries over to my writing, because that's what I'm, that's how I'm tuned in, and maybe hyperly tuned in. Some people say in Bears and Ballots, my problem was I had too much empathy, which made me a lousy politician.
Well, your writing is very compassionate. It is very, you are very compassionate in your writing, and you're very compassionate in the way that you approach some of these differences. And it's, I think it's unique at a time when people are feeling very angry and very kind of zero sum, and feeling like people who are on the other side of the political spectrum or who oppose them on a political issue are the enemy and need to be destroyed. I think that your perspective, which is, as you say, very empathic and very compassionate, is, I think, really, really important. Let me just pause for a moment to remind those of you who are with us online, as well as those of you in future time, whenever that may be, that we are here to support the bookstore in Haines, Alaska. Go to the website. The link is in the chat. Pick up a copy of Heather's latest and also her earlier works. And we're going to be giving you some other ideas about what to pick up in just a few moments. Amy, before we do that, before we get to book recommendations, I want to ask you a little bit about book selling in Haines. So I think the two of you are sitting in the bookstore right now. The bookstore is open. One of the things that I always find very interesting going into different independent booksellers is sort of what is the selection of books that are that the seller chooses to front, to put in the window or to put on the front tables or to put at the register, and sort of how is that curated? And I think even in an area like where I am outside of Boston, there is variability from bookstore to bookstore as different booksellers sort of come to know their communities and come to know their audiences and sort of figure out like, oh, this community has like a big YA fantasy contingent. And so we're going to, whatever it's going to be. Have you, over the course of the last 2 years, had to kind of learn about Haines as readers, learn your community as readers, and figure out what you are going to stock, what you're going to push, that you always need to have a romance pile, or you always need to have whatever. I mean, what has that been like for you?
Yeah, I think that that's a really important. I think that that's what makes independent bookstores so very special is their connection to the community. I am here every day to get the feedback. People's special orders inform me what this community likes to read. I get to see face to face now, thankfully, the people who read. Who are the readers here? What are they reading? I feel like in a way, one of the silver linings about COVID and being closed is that we didn't have any tourists here. This can be a touristy sort of town in the summer a little bit, but during COVID, I really just had to focus on who is here and who is contacting me and having these longer conversations and being able to understand, what people here want and ask them all the time, what would you like to see here? Um, I I am in a unique position in that I'm the only bookstore in town. So, to specialize in something, it just has to be in what the community reads. So, our community, of course, they love to read anything by Alaskan authors. So, I have a lot of Alaskan books by Alaskan authors, and also anything with nature. We have lots of birders here and foragers and hunters and people cook here because we don't have a lot of restaurants. So we don't have you. I mean, they're sometimes open. So everybody here cooks anything on crafting, foraging, anything natural world. We have people in this community who are still avid readers. There are people that maybe don't have internet connection at their homes, and so they sit around and they read and they craft, and so it's different that way. The other part of it too is that we are remote, and so to get books here takes me about 3 weeks from the time I order them. So I can't. It's almost like I can't focus on new books. Any book that comes in that is newer is anything that's been published in the last 6 months for us. So I'm kind of off the hook for having to keep current on those bestsellers. We're not really that connected anyway. The basic life is slower here. So I do try,
People are just getting around to Michelle Obama's book.
Yeah, right. I sold one yesterday.
See?
Yeah.
They're talking about it now, and I'm like, I read that a while ago.
So that's at first I was really stressed. I was like, what do you mean these books are going to take forever to get here? And but everyone is used to waiting here. And like I said, the pace of life is just slower. So I do put the new books in the window, even though, when the tourists come in, they're like, oh, I've read this. It's like, well, yeah, I mean, but no one here has.
Right.
And now that we're open to tourism again, I'm learning all over again. The summer tourists want different books, and I try to accommodate that. I'm learning a whole new audience right now. But they're still very interested in Alaska books and in nature books and what is going on here, because Haines is a really special place, and you can see that if you visit here, even if you Google how beautiful this place is. And what's really great is that Heather writes about Haines, and she writes about how unique and special this community is. And I think people resonate with that, either in their small towns, wherever they are. I've had conversations with people on the East Coast, like people in Maine, small fishing towns. They're like, oh, I can really relate to that. And then there's also the people that it's almost nostalgic. They wish that they could have this community connection, which is important here, and which we get a lot in just in the store every day.
That's wonderful. Janine is sharing how much Haines appreciates you and how you brought the store back to life, and so that I think that sort of speaks immediately to what you're saying. You were Vicky had a couple of questions, one for each of you, and Amy, I think that you sort of answered one of them about getting books to Haines. They come in by ship or mail, and you spoke to that they don't arrive right away. Yeah, how do you get them?
Either plane or boat. So
she's right.
So she's right. And even on a good day in the summer, that still takes about 3 weeks. Our mail and therefore everything else does slow down in the winter times. There are times where the ferry can't make it, therefore the mail doesn't make it, or the planes don't fly for days at a time. And all the locals here are familiar with that. They're like, oh yeah, it's been storming for a week. I know my book is going to be an additional week late. And thankfully everyone has been understanding, because it would be hard to imagine other people putting up with that. But it is really different here in that way.
Heather, Vicky also wonders if you ever see yourself retiring from writing, or do you have so many ideas for your next books there's no way you would ever quit?
I've just been laughing because since Bears and Ballots was done, there's been a lot of, the Writer Laureate thing and a lot of different accolades and COVID. And my dad was living with us for almost 2 years, and he passed away. And so I wake up somewhere and I'm like a total phony. I'm not even writing anything anymore. And then I start talking. I have these notes already. I have some notes for the next book, because I think it's, naturally I'm a storyteller, and I just want to tell people you'll never believe what happened next. And as long as I'm in a place where every time you turn around there's a good story, I want to share it. And so I can't imagine like retiring. I don't feel like I work that hard. My husband is running a lumberyard. I want him to retire, but I've always written around the edges of a very busy life. And so it's just all part of the way I am. I just feel bad when I can't get in enough time to actually have a project. But this morning I was emailing, all of my books are from Algonquin, and I've had the same editor for all 4. And so I was just sending her a note. I said, I think it's time we did another book. What do you think? And here's some ideas. And so I'll see where that goes.
Well, that's very well. I was gonna ask you if there's any hints that you'll provide the audience for what we can expect, but it sounds like maybe will we have to wait, or can you give us some idea about what directions you might think about going in?
I think definitely right now it would be another one to match. What I'm really proud of, that was sort of completely accidental, is that really all 4 of the books taken collectively tell a story about living in a small Alaskan town for, over the course of 40 years, really. The children in my first book, the age of my children, now the age of my grandchildren, and they've grown up here too. And so there's these experiences, and the changes that have happened all through the world have also happened here, for better and for worse, or whatever it is, how we navigate those things. And then personal changes, people come and go, things happen that are all part of life, that if I'd started now and tried to write backwards, a lot of those stories wouldn't be included, but they were at the time. So there you go. And I feel like the politic one, I don't want that to be the last one, because it was kind of a challenge for me. So I want to, if I'm doing sort of 5 that wrap it up, I need to do another one that kind of goes back more to If You Lived Here, I think the first one, and ties it all together. And at least for that point, but who knows? I mean, I basically, when I write, most of the stories are self-contained, almost essays that then all collectively make up a larger story. So there's lots of those all the time still to write.
That's great. Well, we have arrived at the moment when we need to sell some books, and I want to remind the audience that as we're making book recommendations, there's only one place you should be heading to pick them up, and that is the bookstore. They will get them to you by plane, by boat, by carrier pigeon. Heather will drive them out to you herself. Whatever. We'll get you the books. But we are here to support independent book selling. We're going to be putting links for recommended books to the store in the chat. Use those links to pick up some books, as well as, of course, of Bears and Ballots out in paperback. Amy, you were the professional here, so I'll let you lead off. What do you recommend? What are you excited about right now?
Well, besides Heather's books, let's see. We have another local author. She wrote The Sun is a Compass, and this is an amazing book. Anyone who likes Alaska adventure stories.
Carolyn Van Hemmer.
Carolyn Hammer, thank you.
Mhm.
She's a local writer, and her and her husband went on a 4,000-mile journey from Pacific Northwest with their kayaks, portaging over all the way up to the Arctic. And it is an amazing story and incorporates a lot of our wild experiences here, which is great.
Yeah, and she's an ornithologist too, so it's sort of, you learn a lot about birds as you go through, and people and stories, and an excellent storyteller and a writer. And she recently had a piece in the New York Times on bicycling. She's a well-known author for Outside Magazine. You'll see her byline there sometimes too. The other one that I would recommend is a former writer laureate, Ernestine Haines, is a Tlingit woman, Alaska Native, with some connection to Haines. She was actually in one of the old, as you're reading about now, the Native boarding schools. There was such a place in Haines at one time, and Ernestine was there. And this is a really compelling memoir that she wrote that won the American Book Award, and it's called Blonde Indian, and it's about her life that led from really being in a native village that was part of Juneau to homelessness in California, to by the time she was 50, making her way back to Alaska, and the land and the stories and the people and her culture literally saved her. And by 70, Ernestine was an English professor at the University of Alaska, having dropped out of school at 16 before that. She's an inspiration and a very lyrical writer, and she has the Tao of Raven. So anybody interested in the culture here pre-colonization, or what happened to people as a result of that and is continuing to happen, Ernestine is just an incredible resource. That's she's also a terrific author. So that's one for me. Mm-hmm. Got more?
Another really great local author here, Stellar's Orchid by Tom McGuire. This is a novel that is based on the stories from George Stellar. He's a historic naturalist here who ended up naming a lot of the wildlife here. And this is a great telling of a young boy who is trying to find out if there are orchids on the Aleutian chain. And so lots of great descriptions of Alaska in this, Southeast Alaska and the Aleutian chain. Tom's daughter is also a wonderful author. Her name is Rosemary McGuire. She writes about her experiences with fishing and tagging birds up north, and lots of Alaska information in there.
Yeah, and Tom's book, Stellar's Orchid, really, it was a relatively small press run, but I've read it, and lots of other people have, and for many, it's become sort of a favorite Alaska novel. It's really good in sort of the big, old, grand style of novel. Sweeping historical novel comes to mind, but it's so vivid and reads just great. The other one I want to mention, we don't have one in front of us, but probably the most prolific author in Haines, and that is, speaking of the Nash family, is Lenora Bell, who writes romance novels and lives here in a converted old native school that used to be the preschool. And she and her husband live here. She's traveled all around the world as a diplomat and has recently settled back here. And she writes under the pen name Lenora Bell. And she writes steamy romance novels.
They're so wonderful.
Lives in Haines.
Hey, I saw those on the bookstore webpage, and I was like, oh.
And you're like, oh, these are Lenora Bell. And we knew her as Nori, of course, when we still call her that. She sings in the women's choir. And her mom directs it, and her mother Nancy's in a lot of my books. But Lenora is quite the author, and kind of under the radar even sometimes locally, because people don't know Lenora Bell is Nori.
Right. It's kind of a surprise sometimes. I'm like, no, this is a local author, and then they do know her. And what's great about it is that she's great with historical detail, of course. Her female characters are very feisty, and for us, we know her, and so her sense of humor comes through. Her whole family sense of humor comes through in these books.
So it's funny, and I think they all help. I think they all pitch in on different details. The other author that is also lives in Haines is Nick Chance, and this is he's written a lot of essays about Alaska and particularly up north. He taught in Ambler for many years before he retired, and Nick now has a cabin outside of Haines here, and is in Florida in the winter. His essays are beautiful. He's a contributor to Alaska Magazine for people that read that. They read him regularly, and this is a really sweet book about a relationship he had with a wolf called Romeo on Mendenhall Lake, and this wild wolf that made a connection. And that's a neat book to recommend. And then another Alaska author that you really shouldn't miss is Seth Kantner, and A Thousand Trails Home is the latest one. But he's from up north in Kotzebue, and he wrote Ordinary Wolves novel and several essay collections. I like the Alaska mystery writers too. If anybody, like if you're on a boat, you're on a cruise ship, to read Dana Stabenow, she must have 35 now, different series, and they're wonderful.
Or John Straley.
And John Straley writes about Southeast Alaska. Rich Chapone wrote a new one called The Hunger of Crows. If anybody's read that, The Snow Child, was shortlisted for the Pulitzer Prize, and she wrote another book
The
called
Bright Edge of the World.
Yep, and there's a new one by Tom Kazaya called Coal Mountain Path.
Oh, yeah.
About the Wrangell-St. Mountains in a town called McCarthy there. That's just a beautiful, beautiful book. I recommended that one for the NPR read this year because it sort of tells the history of the kind of the mining and that time in Alaska, but from a very personal, quirky, small town point of view. This is A.O. and Ivy. And A.O. was a bookseller in Palmer. She grew up working in the bookstore in Palmer, and when my first book came out, she was, setting up the thing and selling the books, and she was inspired by the bookstore to write. And she grew up outside of Palmer and went on to, almost win the Pulitzer Prize, and her second novel is quite acclaimed as well, and she's on her way. So she's a good writer.
Fabulous recommendations. All of those links are popping up in the chat, so the audience knows what to do. Go pick up some books. Thank you so much for all of those. Amy, do you? I never know quite how to characterize this moment in sort of coming out of the pandemic or whatever, wherever we are in the pandemic. Do you see yourself opening up for in-store events for author readings and launches and live events?
Yes, I mean, I'm very excited to do it. I've been waiting at the starting line for over 2 years now.
Right.
I did have one event, and we had a packed house, and that was it. Just felt so good to have more than 2 people in the store.
Right. It was a physical therapist who's helped a lot of us in town. Does yoga medicine, and she wrote a book on pain and yoga, and I got to introduce it because I had my second book's all about an accident that I had, and she sort of saved my life. And so I'm a believer in her brand of therapy that works very well, especially in a remote place, and it's based really on all kinds of holistic approaches to things, not necessarily pills, because it's hard to get here.
So that was lovely to have a room packed full of people talking about, especially about a local author. We have several, local authors here, and I am looking forward to it. I still am, even though I've been doing this for a couple of years, I'm still learning a lot. My each event will be a growth for me, and but I really look forward to it because it's another expression of community, which is what fuels the store.
And Amy really helped me, and along with the local arts community, there's an Arts Confluence organization here that's also on Main Street. And when Bears and Ballots came out, that was COVID, June 2020, and we all collaborated, and we back in the early days and did this Zoom thing that I was kind of nervous about, and it really helped. I mean, it made it feel special, and they made a cake that I had at my house, and we had it kind of separate but together, and it felt like a book launch. And then what we did was have, you could get signed copies here, so I couldn't actually go sign books anywhere, but I could sign and personalize them, and Amy would just bring cases of these books, and I could write them, and then they went out, and I think
that saved the bottom line.
Probably sold more than we would have if we had an in-person event, because it was the only place I could be in person. And people then could call in and get a book from Amy, and I could write it to their mom or dad or whatever they wanted. And that worked out pretty well.
That worked out great. That actually saved the bottom line for me, and extended this community throughout the nation even. And I ship books to Australia and Canada, and because Heather's fans resonate with the community aspect of the books, and so they want it to be signed by her and personalized by her. And since she wasn't traveling, I was the only place she could get a signed copy. So I kind of turned into the
and I'm like
bookstore
terrible at
shipping.
organization and shipping. So thank God Amy was here, because if people had asked me to do that, I have books in my car that I bought that I was supposed to mail to somebody a week ago.
But it was lovely. It was lovely because people called from all over and just wanted to chat and say what Heather's books meant to them, and that they wanted to support Bookstore in her town, and they wanted to support Haines. And like I said, that extension of community is what it's all about here.
That's great. That's wonderful. Well, it has been such a complete pleasure having the opportunity to speak to the two of you, and thank you both so much for being here with me today. And thank you to the online audience for joining us for another episode of Authors Love Bookstores. Amy, the final question goes to you as the bookseller, as is tradition. And the question is, success in independent bookselling is part luck, part hard work, and part what else?
I would say a lot of luck and a lot of hard work, and then just the community absolutely keeps the store open every single day. And things like this and reaching out, it's definitely the community connection I really appreciate.
It comes through it comes through in the story of your store. It comes through in Heather's writing. One more time for the audience, we are with the bookstore in Haines, Alaska. Click on one of the many links in the chat to pick up a t-shirt, which Amy is modeling today, to pick up one of the many books we've talked about by Alaskan writers, pick up Of Bears and Ballots, available in paperback from Heather Lende. Heather, congratulations once again on Alaska Center for the Book 2022 Contributions to Literacy in Alaska Award. One of your many awards and recognitions. Thank you both so much for being here today. It's been a complete pleasure speaking to you. To the audience, thank you for being here with us. Thank you for supporting independent bookselling. Come back next week to do it again. Until then, be well, keep reading.